Hey, good morning, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite parts of history because it's so crazy. Um, it is the Opium War between Great Britain and China. And so uh, I'm going to try to do one of those little like artsy things, like I'm really bad at art, but it's going to be fun. I'm going to try to describe what the Opium War was to you by this little sheet of paper. Now we're following the notes that are there, all right? But essentially what you need to know is that China, all of their ports were like closed off to European powers. And so that meant that the European powers could come there, grab the silk or the porcelain or whatever, and then they had to take off. And they just kind of had to leave the silver, these are like stacks of silver here, um, for China. So China was doing really well. They got all the money out of this and they traded and they had their markets to sell to, right? Europe was not allowed to sell their goods there. So that was not good for Europe. They were not happy about that. That was a trade imbalance. But remember that India over here is being controlled by Britain during the 1800s, right? Oh, no, 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 don't control India. And one of the things that they could grow over there was this little flower called the poppy flower. And poppy is the main ingredient, for some of you who may know this, of heroin. It's called opium. And this little poppy plant can get you pretty high. And so what Britain figured out was, why don't we grow these poppy plants, make opium, which essentially was a drink, and opium there is like an opiate, which it's like it numbs you, and so people would drink this opium and get like really high and really lazy, and like it was really really bad. Like, so think about our opioid epidemic right now. Same thing. So what Britain was doing was they were smuggling all of this opium into China, and they had these bars. They're kind of like weed bars, like hash bars, but these were opium bars, and all of the Chinese peasants were doing all of this opium, and they didn't want to work. So all of a sudden, all of like the farming and any type of trade and craftsmanship all starts to decline in China because so many people are doing opium. It's crazy. So the Chinese went to the British and said, stop selling opium and drugs to our country. And Britain's like, no, shut up. You don't let us trade in your place? Well, we're going to force this on you. So China's like, nope, we're going to stop it. So they tried to stop it, and that made Britain mad. And so all of a sudden, they made these big, huge steamships. These are sails, these are steamships, and they had all of these machine guns and cannons. And they rolled these steamships right up the rivers and like the Grand Canal that we talked about way long ago that they dug by hand. And they ran these steamships up and they completely destroyed China. China did not industrialize, and they didn't have the weapons to match the British. And the British now took over China. And essentially, they did it kind of like economically. And what they did was, all of these trading ports were now open. They also told all of the other European countries, hey, come on over, we're open for business. And all of a sudden, Germany took this part, and France took, like all of this part, and Britain took this part, and Russia took this part, and Japan even over here, they got in and they took like certain parts. And so they carved up China and forced them to do all of this open trading with them, right? And they even had this thing called extraterritoriality, where if I was a British person living in China, I could break Chinese laws and they couldn't do anything to me. And that's called extraterritoriality. And I was only subject to Britain's laws back over here in Europe. So, it kind of just told the Chinese that they were powerless to do anything against anyone. So, you could almost, go down the street and physically hurt a Chinese person, and that was not a crime. So, really bad for the Chinese. So, the Opium War really was the downfall of China during the 1800s. After this, it just keeps getting worse. So here you can see, like on the PowerPoint, this is this British guy here, pretty much doing a keg stand here of opium with this Chinese person, and not going well. You can see all the wooden ships being destroyed, all right, by the British steamships. All right. So what happens is that things are not going well for China for a while, right? So I think the Opium War was like 1839, and now by 1850, you can see that China is not doing well. So then this guy Hong Sichuan, I think is how it's said, establishes this group of people referred to themselves as the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace, which is the word Taiping, all right? And they wanted land reforms, they wanted equality for men and women, increased morality, and they did not like the Qing dynasty, all right? So they had this big, huge rebellion, and it didn't go well for them. And in the end of it, over this 14-year period, 25 million Chinese lives are lost, and the government is only weakened further. So this right now has nothing to do kind of like with this outside reform, but kind of trying to reform from within, and it doesn't go well. All right. So the Taiping Rebellion only weakens China and kind of opens it up to even more outside influence. And you can see this is kind of what I was talking about with all of these different countries coming in and just kind of controlling China. All right. Which then gets us to the impacts of imperialism. All right. And I'm going to swing it back over here because I want to see you guys. Hi, there you are. So here's the deal. So then, all the way up to now, 1899, and there is still a ton of problems with China. People hate all of the outside Western influence in Japan. They hate them because they're just taking advantage of China. But then on the same side, they also dislike the dynasty, Empress CZ, who's in power, and nobody likes anybody. And so, but the biggest thing is they want to get the foreign powers out. And so there's this movement called the Boxer Rebellion. And it's called the Boxer Rebellion because all the Europeans would sit around and watch these people train in martial arts, and they'd be like, oh, look at those guys. They look like they're boxing. Well, we'll call them the Boxers. And so all of a sudden, these people started running around trying to kill all the Europeans. And all of the Europeans sent in their forces and essentially squashed the rebellion. It does not go well. And millions die again. So, but it is the low point for China. After the Boxer Rebellion, they're just in such a world of hurt. But then in about 10 years, the Empress CZ, she dies, and they bring a 2-year-old to the throne, and everybody goes ape crap over that. And the chaos causes them to start a democratic republic. This guy named Sun Yat-sen, comes in and takes over and starts the first, democratic elected government in China, and it's going to go okay. And that's what we'll talk about coming up. But essentially, right now, China is going to try to westernize and become more like the Western European powers so that they can defend themselves against them. So, with that being said, love you all very much. Check out T and her TikTok channel. I'm starting to do some TikToks. It's kind of a big deal. What's her name?
Oh, it's Keegan.
No, 43 million people who watches.
Charlie D'Amelio.
Look out, Charlie, because this guy right here is going to be taking over the TikTok throne. So, big time. All right. Love you guys. Peace.